We gardeners have our very own language, words that only we use in the garden about gardening topics. And some of them can be confusing, but when you know the words, you know more about gardening. Join me today as I share with you 10 gardening definitions that you should know. The first word on our list is deadhead. Now, to many people, deadhead is a noun. It's a fan of the rock group Grateful Dead. But in the garden, it's a verb. To deadhead is to remove faded or dead flowers from a plant. Flowers don't last forever, and so as they begin to fade and set seed, if you come in and prune off the spent flowers, you're deadheading. For many flowers, when you come in and deadhead the spent blossoms, new ones will begin forming. And it can actually encourage many more blooms, to the point that you might get 2 or 3 blooms from a single plant. The next definition you should know is days to maturity. On seed packets, it will often give you a guideline for when you can expect your plant to be at the point that you can harvest it. It might also be called days to harvest. On this package of Market More 76 cucumber seeds, it just says 60 to 69 days. On this package of the same Market More variety, it says days to harvest 60. And on this package of Market More 76 seeds, it says days to maturity 68. Well, as you might already have figured out, this is one of those definitions that does not have a concise answer. Generally, if the seed is one that we're direct sowing, you start the clock when you sow the seeds. And there are many seed companies in their catalogs and online that will say exactly that, days from sowing. For other seeds, it's after they've actually germinated. And so you may see that in a seed catalog. You start the clock after germination begins. For plants that we're putting into the garden, like the peppers and the tomatoes that we start from seed indoors, the clock starts after the plant is in the ground. It's a guideline. So for these cucumbers, anywhere from 60 to 69 days gives us an idea of when we can expect the plant to be mature enough that we can start harvesting. The next term is chill hours. Many of the fruit trees and fruit bushes that we're growing need a period of dormancy. They'll drop their leaves, they'll go to sleep, they'll reset their clock to determine when their buds are going to grow in spring and then fruit develop. Many of these plants need a period of cold dormancy, chill hours that are below 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And so the critical temperature between 32 and 45 is what the plant is measuring. And some plants, like plum trees and pear trees and apple trees, will need as much as 700 to 1,000 chill hours at that critical temperature. If they don't get those cold temperatures, then they might be late to set their buds and bloom. And the fruit that year may not actually develop. This is a big reason why apple trees that need a lot of chill hours won't grow in Florida, where there aren't many chill hours to be had. When you choose your fruit trees, you need to make sure you match them to your particular climate, how many chill hours you get and how many chill hours the tree needs. The next definition is chop and drop. The idea behind chop and drop is when we're pruning a plant, we chop it or cut it and just let it drop to the ground. We can use this for deadheading, where we want to cut our flowers and we'll just let the spent blossoms drop. But particularly for a plant like this stinging nettle that's starting to set seed, but I don't want the seed spreading all over, I'll just cut off the growing tips. I'll chop and then allow those tops to just drop. And you can do this with weeds, with any plant in your garden that you're trying to keep nice and tidy. The dropped portion just becomes extra mulch underneath the plant. You should know about NPK. Now, NPK is just kind of a shorthand term for the fertilizers that we're using in our garden. The N stands for the nitrogen, the P is for phosphorus, and the K is for potassium. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are macronutrients that all plants need. So when we buy a fertilizer, typically those are the 3 ingredients that will be included. There will be numbers on a bag of fertilizer, like this one, 3, 3, 3. So that means by weight, 3% of this bag is nitrogen, 3% is phosphorus, and 3% is potassium. If you have a 10, 10, 10 bag of fertilizer that weighs 100 pounds, 10 pounds of that bag will be nitrogen, 10 pounds will be phosphorus, and 10 pounds will be potassium. NPK are the 3 numbers that you need to know about for fertilizer. You should know about top dressing. When we add fertilizer or organic matter to the top of the soil, that's top dressing. Some of the things we use, like this soil acidifier, says to sprinkle on the surface and then water in well. That's top dressing. This fertilizer says one of the applications is to sprinkle underneath the leaves and then scratch into the soil. That's top dressing. If we're adding 1 inch or 2 of compost to our garden beds and just leaving it in place, that's top dressing. Anything that we're adding to the top of the soil to improve that soil and improve the performance of our plants is top dressing. You should know about green manure. Now, green manure is actually not manure. For eons, humans have added animal manure to soils to put nutrients back into the soil. Green manure does the same thing, but instead of using animal manures, it's using plants, growing plants for the purpose of turning into the soil to add the nutrients from that plant back into the soil. In this bed of tomatoes, that's what I did last year. I planted a number of different cover crops, including some that are still growing, with the intent of using it as a green manure. So early spring, I turned all of that organic matter back into the soil so that the microbes could begin decomposing it, releasing those nutrients, and then feeding all of my tomatoes during the growing season. Green manure is a plant used to benefit the soil, not actually animal manure. The next term to know is trap crop. If you have insect pests in your garden, you probably don't want them eating your primary vegetable plants. So you put in a plant that will attract those pests. The pests will eat that plant and leave the rest of your garden alone. That plant is a trap crop. Essentially, you're trapping the pests on a single plant, like this comfrey. I like to grow comfrey for the leaves. They're packed with nutrients, and I can use those nutrients in other sections of the garden. But grasshoppers love the comfrey. I'm not eating the comfrey. I don't mind if there are holes in the leaves of the comfrey. So a plant like this as a trap crop, trapping the grasshoppers that are only on this plant and leaving the rest of the garden alone, can be a great idea. And there are many different plants that are preferred by particular pests. So if you have a pest problem you're trying to deal with, find out what their favorite plant is, put that plant away from the plants you're trying to save, and hopefully those pests will find that trap crop, saving the rest of your garden. You should know the definition of biennial. Biennial plants are plants that live for 2 years. This is particularly important if you like to save seeds, because biennial plants typically are going to flower and seed in the second season. Many brassicas are biennials. Plants like this Swiss chard and these beets are biennials. If I want to save the seed of my beets and my chard, I need to leave them in the ground over the winter. And then next year, I can expect them to flower and seed, and then I can continue the process. Occasionally, if the plants are stressed by sun and wind and dry conditions, they might flower and seed in the first year. But you can expect, and you should anticipate, that biennial plants are going to take 2 years before you can collect their seeds. The next word is usually pretty straightforward, but it can lead to some confusion. The word is compost. Compost in the United States is simply decayed organic matter. These are my compost bins. In that bin, I have some fresh material from the garden. Some of it's green, some of it's brown. It hasn't decayed yet. So even though I'm composting that material, it hasn't turned into the decayed material that we call compost. In this bin, this material is fully decomposed. It's compost. So I can amend my soil with it, or I can add it to the top of my soil as a top dressing. In the UK, and I like to watch a lot of British gardening videos, they will often refer to the planting medium that they're putting seedlings or small plants into as compost. In the United States, we call the same thing potting mix. So if you're watching a British gardening channel and they're telling you to start your seeds or put your plants into compost, they're not talking about fully decomposed organic matter. They're talking about a mix of organic materials that are specifically sold to grow plants. Because we have so many unique terms and terminology that no one else uses, I can understand why gardening becomes even more confusing for those of us that don't know those definitions. If there's something that you've been wondering about that you don't fully understand, go ahead and put it in the comments below so that I can do another video like this with the terminology that gardeners just don't fully understand. If there's something that you want to try and you heard a term or a phrase, before trying it blindly, try to learn more about that word or phrase. It'll probably help you have more gardening success. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.